Festival of the Lost and spooky season is in full swing here in Destiny 2. Today we have a compilation of some of the mysteries and lore over the last couple of years since the Book of the Forgotten came out. So this video will have volume 1, 2, and 3 of the stories from the Book of the Forgotten, and tomorrow's video will go over the new lore for book 4 this week. So without further ado, let's jump into some spooky tales. "You're not going to make fun of him, are you?" the administrator asked with a raise of her eyebrow. "He's been through enough already." "Just the opposite," Glint assured her. "I'm one of the few people who actually believes him." "Huh," the administrator replied. She tapped her data pad and brought up the requested hidden reports. Glint transmitted the authorization code Ikora had given him, and he received the decrypted upload seconds later. "Robots who believe in the headless ones," she shook her head. "It boggles the mind." "Ghost, actually," Glint corrected. "You believe in ghosts too?" the administrator tut-tutted. "I never figured the Traveler would have made you lot so gullible. Thought you little guys were supposed to be super smart. I mean, you're basically living computers, right?" "I think we're sentient energy signatures housed in a cybernetic construct," Glint said, trying not to be offended. "But I do have an internal database, if that's what you mean." The administrator turned back to her workstation. "Well, good luck on your wild goose chase, Mr. Energy Signature." The following audio imprint was recovered by Glint, the ghost, during scans of an exo production facility on Europa. Its origins remain a mystery. "We saw it, the machine tower buried in ice. At first we thought it was a glitch, some kind of psychological artifacting created by the transfer of our consciousness into a digital format. The bio-mind just trying to adapt to life in a machine body. Inconsistencies like that are pretty common, especially right after a reboot. What isn't common for a whole group of us to experience is the exact same vision at the same time. If it is a glitch, it must be a subroutine buried further down than any of us have diagnosed before. Something we all have in common from before the reboot. But if it's not a glitch, then what the hell is it?" "Well, Glint, I would classify that as evidence per se," Cryptarch Matsu hedged. "The spontaneous creation of similar legends in disparate cultures is a well-documented phenomenon. Even in the absence of direct communication, some scholars call it simultaneous invention. For instance," he continued, "the Yetis of the Himalayan folklore and the lumbering Jacks of North American legend, both reclusive ape-like creatures said to populate the wilderness. Or the centaur of Greek mythology and the sheepdog of Northern Europe, both mythical creatures said to be hybrids of other species, etc. So yes, it is interesting that so many cultures have stories of the headless ones, but that doesn't prove they exist. If anything, it suggests that simultaneous invention is more universal than previously thought," Matsu concluded. "Access restricted. Hidden agents redacted. European Vex activity." Skirmishes are common in the noted sectors. Neither side seems committed to territorial expansion. I'm reluctant to report that I had another sighting in the glacial cave near Cadmus Ridge. This time I managed to get a good look at the creature with my rangefinder. The body was unmistakably that of a hive knight, while the helmet, or head, appeared to be that of a pumpkin. The pumpkin appeared to have a face carved into it, 3 eyes and a big smiling mouth, with flames shooting out, bright purple flames. I know how that sounds, so I'm submitting myself to redacted for a full psychological battery. I've instructed her to alert Ikora Ray of the results, whatever the outcome. The following audio imprint was recovered by Glint, the ghost, during scans of an exo production facility on Europa. Its origins remain a mystery. "We finally arrived. Trading the red dust of Mars for the blue ice of Europa feels right. The visions became more intense the closer we got. Mortimus 3 thinks it's a warning from the Warmind, or an assignment, a secret mission, something that only we could achieve. Tomorrow we begin our search for the machine tower, but still there's a nagging suspicion. Is this some kind of collective glitch? Is this all just in our heads? How could they chop off their own heads? Saint 14 interjected. It makes no sense. They would all die halfway through. Well, Glint replied, they could have built some kind of device, a guillotine maybe. Saint 14 held up his massive paws. I've seen many heads removed, some with my own hands, but never have I seen anyone remove their own head, not even an exo. I respect your commitment to this research, Geppetto said, but unfortunately there's no hard evidence supporting your claims. Glint's shell flaps sagged. What about the similarities between all the sightings? Bah, Saint 14 scoffed. People say many things. You should hear what the Elixnis say about me. He looked at the floor and scuffed his feet. Not everything you hear is true. I'm happy that you're taking time to rest, Geppetto said, bobbing encouragingly. After everything you and Brother Crow have been through, it's well deserved. Just don't get your hopes up. Access restricted. Hidden agents redacted. European Vex activity. Having reviewed your transmissions and redacted report, leadership has decided to pull you from Europa for reassignment. You are instructed to remain in camp, engage your emergency transponder, and await extraction. Off the record, your last report has been making its way around the tower. It's become a bit of a joke. So when they debrief you, just keep your mouth shut about this pumpkin nonsense. Play it off as exhaustion, an optical illusion, or whatever, and you'll be back in the field in no time. The following audio imprint was recovered by Glint the Ghost during scans of an EXO production facility on Europa. Its origins remain a mystery. Mortimus 3 looked so content lying on the conveyor belt, like he was getting the best sleep of his life. I envied him. Once the conveyor belt started, the maker's spindly pneumatic arms came to life. They descended on Mortimus, darting in and out of his joints, dismantling him piece by piece. It started with his hands and feet and worked its way inward, unmaking him from a whole into a million tiny components. There was a moment after all of his limbs and torso had been stripped away and he was just a head with a long jumble of neural connectors streaming out of his neck like a robotic jellyfish when his eyes opened. He looked at me, mouth gaping like he was trying to tell me something, and then his eyes went dark. It's my turn next. Glint met the former hidden agent in a sake bar called the Drunken Noodle. He had agreed to speak on the condition of anonymity and was already drunk when Glint arrived. Man, they can say whatever they want. I saw what I saw, the man affirmed. He motioned to the proprietor for another pitcher. They always tell you, report everything, no detail too small, you never know what matters most. Bunch of bullcrap, he grumbled. I saw what I saw. A headless one, Glint prompted, struggling to contain his excitement. What? The man asked. No, it had a head, that's what I'm saying, haven't you been listening? He lurched to his feet. Nearby diners began to whisper and point. It had a big, smiling pumpkin head, he shouted belligerently, with 3 eyes and purple flame shooting out of it. The bar fell silent. The man suddenly felt everyone staring. I saw what I saw, damn it. I've looked beyond this reality, said Eris Morn, lacing her hands together in front of her face. Beyond light and darkness. Wow. I've seen Ahamkara slain by my own blade. I've seen time broken and the veil of causality sundered. Jeez. I've seen my fire team murdered and their phantoms manifested to torment me. Eris stared off into the middle distance. I've seen many things I wish I could forget. You've really seen it all, Glint said. And blindfolded. Eris's focus shifted back to the ghost floating before her. But in all my time, the one thing I have never seen, She leaned forward with such deliberate purpose that Glint tilted backward. Is a pumpkin-headed creature with flames shooting out of its face. But what if... Not even once, little light, Eris said with finality. Not even on the moon, I would have remembered. From the private notes of Dr. Wade Bowe, K1 Dig Site 4, date unknown. Had my first bout of predormital sleep paralysis last night. It was expected given the insomnia. What I didn't expect was for it to feel so real. Now I understand why the miners are scared. The figure standing over me was a shadow, but also solid. My mind was 100% convinced it was physically present. Terrifying. Another surprise was how familiar the shadow seemed. I had the eerie feeling that I would have recognized it if I could have just seen its face. Ilea's eyes fluttered open as she roused herself from a trance. The Techian had been recuperating from her time in the Ascendant Plane by completing a series of restorative meditations. No sooner had she regained her bearings that Glint scooted in front of her face. "Excuse me, Techian Ilea?" the ghost began. "Now that you're awake, do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" His shell flaps tilted sheepishly. "How long have you been watching me meditate?" the Techian asked, bemused. 143 minutes, Glint said. "It was quite impressive. Crow can barely sleep for an hour without yelling at invisible enemies." "The invisible enemies are the most dangerous," Ilea responded. "Just look at Savathun." Glint hummed non-committally. He couldn't tell whether the Techian was joking or not. "Speaking of invisible enemies," Glint segued, "I wanted to ask you about a sinister group of pumpkin-headed monsters called the Headless Ones. Maybe you heard of them during your training?" Ilea frowned quizzically. "I think I might know something of the ones you seek, but to be certain you must first tell me, what's a pumpkin?" "But why pumpkins?" Glint asked in confusion. Many Golden Age cultures celebrated the transition from autumn to winter by honoring the spirits of the dead, Cryptarch Ureli replied. He rummaged through a stack of ancient tomes stored individually in vacuum-sealed containers. That time of the year was thought to be a liminal phase when living could communicate with the dead. The Cryptarch finally located the tome he had been searching for. He put on a pair of white cotton gloves and unsealed the container. This is one of the few remaining source documents on the subject. It was published specifically for gentlemen and esteemed social class at the time. He began gently leafing through the volume. "Here it is," he said, pointing to a chapter entitled "Pumpkin Body Paint is the Hot New Holiday Trend." It featured depictions of unclothed humans with orange-ribbed gourds painted on their most globular anatomy. As you can see, pumpkins featured heavily in the iconography of this time. People would paint them all over their bodies, even in highly inconvenient locations. "And this helped them communicate with the dead?" Glint asked, incredulous. Cryptarch Ureli replied absently, mesmerized by the historical photos. He frowned. That part of it remains unclear. From the private notes of Dr. Wade Bowe, K1 Dig Site 4, date unknown. Nobody has slept in over 12 days and people are becoming desperate. We're out of pentobarbital and dexmedetomidine. Instances of alcohol abuse are up dramatically. One poor woman even tried to knock herself out with diluted isopropyl alcohol. Meanwhile, my hallucinations have gotten stronger each night. The shadow is becoming clearer and clearer. For the first time, I realize why it seems so familiar. The shadow is me, or another version of me. I also realize why I didn't recognize it sooner. It's because that version of me, from whatever time or dimension, he doesn't have a head. What does he want? That way, when they lit the candle, it would light up the face carved into the pumpkin. There was a long pause as Ilea studied the hologram Glint had projected for her. "And this was common during the Golden Age?" the Techian asked. "It was," Glint nodded. Humans used to put this pumpkin head all over the place. They would even paint them on their... But why? Alea interrupted. Oh, they thought it would help them speak to the dead, Glint chirped matter-of-factly. The tech witch furrowed her brow, piecing together many fragments of disparate lore. If these legendary pumpkins were tools for seeing beyond the veil of death, she mused, then it makes sense they would become the emblem of... She looked at Glint expectantly. The Headless Ones, Glint encouraged her. I'm really trying to make that name stick. I think it's pretty neat. Cade used to tell stories about the Headless Ones, Ikora recounted with a wry smile. He said he killed dozens of them on the moon. The way he told it, they exploded like piñatas. She raised her eyebrows. Of course, it only ever happened when he was alone. The rest of us never found anything but hive. Do you think there might be some truth to his stories? Glint asked, encouraged. Cade wasn't a liar, but he did love to embellish. That's what made him a great storyteller. She chuckled at a happy, unspoken memory. Glint arched his shell flaps. So you wouldn't mind if I looked at these reports? Ikora considered. I don't see why not. The files are decades old by now. Just promise me one thing, she said. If you do find something, tell me. Tell everyone. Cade would have liked that. From the private notes of Dr. Wade Bowe, K1 Dig Site 4, date unknown. The hallucinations have become persistent. My headless friend now appears during the daytime. I see him out of the corner of my eye, but when I turn my head, he disappears. I've also started losing time. I will blink and suddenly I'm in a strange location several hours later. I'm not sure if it's short-term memory loss or a fugue state. Yesterday, I woke up in the equipment locker, standing in front of the plasma cutters. Several were already missing. The shadow was standing right next to me. I think I know what he wants. Monsters exist in awoken legends, some of which originated during humanity's golden age, Elea explained to Glint as they strolled through the dusky gardens of the dreaming city. It was a time when many attempted to subvert the laws of life and death, like Clovis Bray, as well as a faction of the Hive. Elea raised an eyebrow in Glint's direction. Bray used the tools of the Vex, while Hive blasphemers practiced the magical art of necromancy. Her tone darkened. Both succeeded, after a fashion. The early Hive experiments were done in secret under the guidance of a powerful wizard whose name we'll not mention here. Nokris, Glint offered. Yes, Elea grimaced. The unmentionable wizard created many abominations, using deceased and living subjects, including your unfortunate moon miners. She steepled her fingers. It's possible that access to these powerful pumpkins were a boon to his research. Her eerie gaze pierced Glint's mechanical eye. This may explain why the Headless Ones persist to this day, and why their flaming visages bear a similarity to your Golden Age relics. Wow, that explains a lot, Glint marveled. But, he continued reluctantly, pumpkins aren't powerful relics, they're just fruit. They are indeed, Elea concluded direly, the fruit of the damned. As Glint neared the Exodus Black, he requested permission to board over open comms. A chipper digital voice quickly replied, Yes, I am happy to receive you, even if you are a terrible ingrate. Thanks, failsafe, Glint scooted into the ship, away from the prying eyes of the Vex and Fallen. I know the Vanguard hasn't been back here in a while, but... Correct, it's been almost 2 years since you last visited, even though you promised you'd come back often, the AI replied. I've since developed the emotion of betrayal, just for you. Well, I'm here now, Glint tried to keep his tone light. I was hoping you can help me with a research project. Of course, I'm happy to be exploited for your gain, Failsafe replied helpfully, and then in a more dour tone, anything to break the unending loneliness. I'm hoping you can tell me about the Headless Ones. Glint uploaded all the information he had into Failsafe's mainframe. I have intel that they're around here somewhere. You are correct, the AI replied. They're my neighbors, and they're the absolute worst. Access restricted. Agents redacted. Nessus crash site. We're not the only ones surveying this crash site. Fallen have been pouring into the area, fighting with Vex for control of the wreckage. For now, we've dug into some subterranean ruins just west of the downed ship. We're covering the entrance and can hold our positions so long they don't find an access point to our flank, but there's just too many for the four of us. We'll need reinforcements if we want to secure the site. Standing by for instructions. I've heard the tales of such creatures, Mithrak said, his deep voice resonating through the ruins. Those with eyes of flame, tormented by endless burning. And where did the Elixni think they came from? Glint asked. Some say they were once Hive, twisted by foul experiments. He paused to take a pull from his rebreather. Others say they were guardians who turned to darkness. Has anyone from House Light seen them? Mithrax emitted a series of low clicks which Glint took as grumbling. Clyfix, our engineer, says he witnessed the creatures on Nessus, but the enormous Kel seemed to be struggling with a translation. Yes, the ghost prompted. What about him? What is the human word for one with good spirit but who speaks loudly and without reason? He asked. An idiot? Glint offered gently. Yes, it is so, the enormous Kel nodded. Clyfix is an idiot. They've been hanging around in those ruins for centuries, Failsafe continued brightly. But they've never once come to say hello. If they've been there that long, why don't they appear more often? Glint asked. The AI snipped. Why don't you ask them? Oh wait, you can't because they only speak in fiery shrieks. I see. What's your best guess then? Glint asked. They probably don't want to be smashed by rampaging guardians, the AI responded dourly. How should I know? I just figured that since you were one of the greatest intelligences in the system, you might have some insight, Glint said. Your disingenuous compliment has been noted and appreciated, Failsafe replied, the lift returning to her voice. Would you like to play checkers? Access restricted. Agents redacted. Nessus crash site. Mayday, extraction needed. The Fallen found an access point in the ruins. They hit our flank an hour ago. Drosana and Rubin were killed in the initial blast. We fought our way to a defensible position, but it won't last long. Murrah survived, but he's been gut-shot. Without a ghost, he won't get through the night. We're surrounded. Shooting our way out is no longer an option. We need orbital bombardment to cover our exit, followed by immediate medical extraction. Ido translated Glint's question to Clyfix, who sprawled across his chair with an air of self-importance. The two conversed for almost a minute before Ido turned back to Glint. Clyfix will tell you what he has seen, but he must receive something in return. She bobbled her head slightly, which Glint interpreted as equivalent to an eye roll. He wants his own sparrow. Glint quickly scanned his internal database for decommissioned sparrows and identified several old models that he thought would be to Clyfix's liking. When Ido relayed Glint's optimism, the engineer's mandibles clicked in what the ghost assumed was excitement. The Elixni chittered back and forth. Ido then translated. He says that he saw the creatures on Nessus during his time with the House of Dusk. They were fighting the Vex over the remnants of a crashed human ship. The exit is black, Glint interjected. Just so, Clyfix claims. She emphasized the word and paused to make her skepticism clear. That during one of these battles, he sheltered in some ruins near the crash site. Inside, he says he saw a being with a round, bulbous head and flames for eyes. They chittered back and forth once more. He says it did not attack, but he doubts you will be welcome. King me, Glint chirped as he scooted his digital pip into Failsafe's back row. The holographic checkers board hanging in front of him suddenly exploded into a shower of digital cubes. Murky darkness filled the Exodus Black's cabin. "Oops," the AI said. "I accidentally knocked the board over. How clumsy of me." "Well," Glint fidgeted, inching toward the exit. "I should get back to the Guardian. We're going to visit your neighbors." "Great. Next time you come by, I'll reveal their true origins," the AI volunteered slyly. "But you said you didn't know where they came from," Glint objected. "You asked why they never visit me, not the nature of their existence. Those are two different questions," Failsafe said. "But come again," the AI continued, "and I'll tell you everything you want to know about the Hive necromancer who ripped the concept of the Headless Ones from the human subconsciousness." "But only if I come back to visit, right?" "That's right," said Failsafe smugly. "I hear that's called incentive." Access restricted. Agents redacted. Nessus crash site. 6 o'clock. Orbital bombardment complete. 6:10. Insertion completed. Evidence of heavy fighting surrounding the crash site. No response on open channels. 6:22. Holdout site located. Entrance barricaded from outside as described. No evidence of a breach attempt. 6:47. Barricade breached. Entrance deemed stable. Fallen forces occupy the ruins. Comms still silent. 7:32. Forward assault team has secured the area. Small arms fire is ongoing. We've located 3 human bodies, each with multiple gunshot wounds. Their heads have been removed. 7:55. Evidence that at least one more human body was scattered by explosives. No sign of the team's weapons, ghosts, or heads. 8:26. Fallen reinforcements are mobilizing. Rear guard is exchanging heavy weapons fire. 8:36. Extraction initiated. Site remains under Fallen control. Bringing back what remains we can. Traveler help us all. "Glint, it's good to see you," Eva exclaimed. "I've been enjoying your additions to our little collection." She patted the Book of the Forgotten. "Though it makes me sad to think of all those poor lost souls driven mad by this or that, even if they are just tall tales." "Actually," Glint chirped, "the Guardian and I are close to proving once and for all that the Headless Ones are real." "My goodness," Eva shook her head in disbelief. "Then again, I shouldn't be surprised. This system keeps getting stranger and stranger." Just then, a Guardian wearing a ferocious chicken mask offered Eva some candy. She politely declined. "Yeah, but they can't hold a candle to this city. There's no one stronger than us," Glint said. They giggled like school children, and for a moment, all their worries were forgotten. The Headless Ones, the Hall Between, Guardian legends that have been twisted and told as long as the city has been around. Last year, we were introduced to these monstrosities, and Glint had an investigation to try and learn the truth. This year, the tales continue with Ido and some spooky revelations. Over the next couple of days leading up to Halloween and the Festival of the Lost Season, we're going to be taking a look at these stories, today beginning with the Drowned Captain. Phison of House Dusk, loyal to Krask, Kell of Kings, slayer of Lightbearers and Cabal, lay silently beneath the dark waters. The dull eyes of Cabal legionaries peered thoughtlessly into the darkness as they slogged through the water like livestock. And when Phison rose up, blades gleaming in all 4 hands, roaring with the might of House Dusk, the Cabal cried out in their cruel and blundering tongue, their mouths fetid with fear, and they were slain. From that day on, Phison of House Dusk had earned a new accolade among the Elixni. He was henceforth known as the Drowned Captain. "So he cut off his own arm?" Ido asked wearily. Drifter flicked a coin at an empty cookpot where it pinged against the rim and bounced away. "He tripped and fell on his own damn sword," Drifter corrected. "A little different." "But it didn't kill him?" "Nah, he left that to the Guardian." But the ode claims, "You readin' poetry? I got one for ya," Drifter said mischievously and cleared his throat. "There once was a fallen named Phison who took on a team of 3 light spawn. He saw they were armed, and he spoke with alarm. If I knew we would fight, I'd be long gone." Ido loomed over the gathered hatchlings who huddled together nervously. Drifter loitered nearby. "The drowned captain feared nothing," Ido intoned. "So when he saw the 3 glowing eyes in the cave mouth, he opened fire." Ido mimed furious shooting with all 4 hands. But after he stopped, the creature was not felled. Instead, she said, her voice dropping to a low rasp, "it advanced." Purple flames poured from the creature's eyes, she said, leaning forward. It let loose a deafening shriek. Drifter, sensing his cue, let loose a blood-curdling scream, causing the hatchlings to jump and chitter in fright. And when the scream ended, Phison of House Dusk, the drowned captain, had disappeared, Ido whispered, and was never seen again. Phison of House Dusk, loyal to Krask, Kell of Kings, was tested by wave after wave of Cabal intruders. But each platoon that lumbered witlessly into his lair fell to pieces beneath the Elixni heroes' blades. Their entrails disgorged into the stagnant water, and their bleats of fear echoed off the cavern walls. However, just as his victory was assured, the Elixni hero felt a blade slide into his back between his lower arms. A drag's knife, sharpened by betrayal, became his undoing. And so, Phison of House Dusk slid beneath the water once more. "Father, you once served the House of Dusk alongside Phison, the drowned captain, did you not?" Ido kept her tone casual. "His reputation was known by all," Mithrax replied cautiously. "The Odes say he was a ferocious warrior," Ido prompted, "who killed many Cabal. They speak of his bravery." Mithrax fidgeted silently with the regulator on his ether rebreather. "Was it not so?" she insisted. "Phison was incompetent," Mithrax grumbled. "He once blew a hole in the side of his own catch attempting the rite of 6 hands with a live grenade. He was a buffoon." "Yet the Odes..." "Odes are for hatchlings," Mithrax replied more forcefully than intended. "They make glory of desperation and bravery of ignorance. As a scribe," he continued more calmly, "you must learn to see the truth in such wishful thoughts." I tell tale of the drowned Phison, House Dusk captain, with his sword drawn on machine spawn, and Cabal, and with our house, our captain led against the Legion, risen dead, our foes ahead, Physon's call. But drowned Phison had at his back betrayers lunging to attack, and one, a Saxoff coward, took sharpened knife and drove it through Physon's armor, and others too violence anew, empowered. But dead and still, a whisper came. It spoke of terror, undone shame, violet eyes aflame, ether gone, a tongue of fire, a screaming head, a creature made of seething dread, and it is said, drowned Phison. Phison of House Dusk, loyal to Krask, Kell of Kings, lay betrayed. As his life ether flowed into the murky water, he heard a call. It was not the call of his Kell, nor of his dregs. It was not the call of the great machine, nor that of the awoken prince. It was the call of the voice in the darkness, which bade him to rise, reborn and remade in a form both terrible and terrifying. And as Phison rose, no longer of House Dusk, he roared with flame that poured from his mouth and eyes, and his spirit longed for ether no more. "Spider, I wish to ask you about Phison, the drowned captain," Ido prompted. "No doubt you've heard the odes." Spider chuckled sardonically. "Huh, I wish I knew who wrote them. I could use a liar like that in my operation." "My father also doubted their veracity," Ido said, intrigued. "There was a reason Phison died guarding a hole in the ground," Spider chortled. "Krask knew he was a liability." "If he was so widely ridiculed, why do the odes honor him?" Ido asked, puzzled. Spider surveyed the ether tank shrewdly. It's the first rule of propaganda, little scribe. Everyone is either a friend or foe. There's no room for nuance. But in the real world, Ido supplied, that's all there is, Spider finished. 2 guardians were riding a sparrow through the EDZ, Glint began. Ido typed into her datapad. They were both on one sparrow? She asked flatly, not looking up. Yes, Glint said. They stopped at the side of the road because the sparrow had broke down. One went to look for supplies, and the other waited inside and locked the doors. The sparrow had doors? This one did, Glint said, and they were locked. But then the guardian heard a scratching at the door from outside. Ido stopped typing, watching Glint with interest. And a voice said, "Let me in," and the guardian opened the door, but there was nobody there. Glint bobbed in the air, whispering a tremulous, "Ooh." And? Ido asked. Glint stopped moving and glanced back and forth. "That's the end," he said. Ido's notes were brief. So there you have it, Guardians, some tales about this drowned captain from Ido trying to learn more from various characters like Spider, and Glint with a weird story there at the end. Listen, here is the story of the Legion Lost, who saw a final dishonor at the hands of an enemy. War-hardened, tusk-proud, bonded in battle, broken at last in their deathless death, felled by light eaters, fated to be taken. Many times the story has been told, we tell it again. The Legion Lost, warred into this teeming place, ruined scattered earth for a shame-destined foe. Few could stand their might, so great was it. They scoured the earth with ship and steel, gilded and gleaming, heaped in glory. They took what was there to be taken, lives and loss. And these headless ones, Kaido began, tilting down her tusks in contemplation. They are warriors? Oh yes, Ido said, looking up at the Cabal Empress. In fact, they may be Cabal in origin. I am investigating the stories now. Your retainers mentioned a similar tale, and I understand your people have a strong oral tradition. Surely there are accounts of flaming heads, swords of unusual size. Kaido considered this. There have been Cabal who have eaten fire, walked through fire, and belched fire, but that is all. I see, said Ido, crestfallen. Kaido put one massive hand on Ido's shoulder. There were many warriors with their heads on fire, she offered in consolation, but not continuously. After the drowned captain disappeared, Ido said to the gathered hatchlings, the Cabal claimed the cavern as their own. The hatchlings muttered darkly, mimicking their elders' prejudices against the Cabal. But the very first night of their occupation, a figure appeared in the mouth of the cave, Ido said. It had a big round head, and flames poured from its giant mouth. It was a headless one. Did they get eaten? A tiny hatchling squeaked. Even worse, she said. The creature ripped off their heads and left their bodies roaming around the cavern, bumping into walls. She stuck out all 4 arms and moaned dully. And that's where they remain to this very day, she concluded. Earth was war-wounded, light-devoured. The Legion Laws grasped victories where they could. Ungoverned, burned in spirit, born bitterly, they fought with honor until honor fled them. Here was how they found first death. Where the Legion Lost moved forward to their curse, they found an enemy too fierce for them to fell. Cornered, cowed, the Legion Lost made to take great caves and hidden places, a final stand made to hoard their honor. Life-given, broken, made to suffer, they saw their end before them. Like a wild war beast, the Light Eater descended. The Legion Lost dealt defeat by their hands. Thank you for speaking with me, Ido said cheerfully. The Scion bowed its head, and Ido did the same. I've conducted an interview with Empress Kaido already, but I am hoping that you could further illuminate the subject. Ido felt a soft, blooming sensation in the forefront of her mind, gracious acquiescence. I am searching for more information about the headless ones, and the thought of a creature without a head sent up a spike of adrenaline, a flash of sickening terror that burst into Ido's mind so violently that she jumped. The Scion's own thoughts only compounded its fear. Ido's eyes widened. "Oh, I'm..." Screaming, purple flames pouring from empty eyes. "I'm so sorry, Screaming, a burst of confetti. "I didn't mean to..." Screaming, candy everywhere. "To upset you." About 13.2 kilograms, Cryptargarelli read from the scales. Ido wrung both sets of hands uncomfortably. The laboratory walls were lined with hundreds of canopic jars filled with preserved organs and appendages. She recognized many of them as elixni. "Is that heavy?" Ido inquired. The Cryptarch arched an eyebrow at her. "Quite heavy for confetti. You say the headless ones emit a shower of this material upon death?" "They do," Ido replied, "along with an edible the Guardians call candy." She tried unsuccessfully to keep the disgust from her tone. The Cryptarch shook his head in disbelief. "Aside from its density, which is incredible, this confetti is identical to the stuff humans use during pre-Dark Age celebrations." Ido's eyes twinkled with inspiration. "Celebrations like the Hall Between." But less than death the Legion lost became. In their great shame at the end of their battle, great weapons fell from their grasp, but whispered were they into new wandering, dark forged and taken into shameful embrace. The Legion lost gained their name in death. Curse charged, terror torn, they raised eyes darkened, then lit with flame, sword screaming, rising from purple pyres. Heads aflame, their end was found in endlessness. No more wandering or warring in these lands. The Legion lost live as shame and story. "And these monsters exist?" Lord Saladin asked, his voice grave. Ido nodded nervously. "I have ample evidence for their existence. I know that they have flaming pumpkin heads and that they're filled with candy," Ido said stiffly. "And loot. They're also filled with loot." Lord Saladin considered this. Ido could not discern what he might be thinking. "But I question Glenn's conclusions about their origins," she added. The Iron Lord stared her down. "You heard about this from Glint?" "Yes, I don't have time for this," Saladin said, and walked away.
I interviewed several of Empress Kaido's retainers in the tower. They believe the Headless Ones are Red Legionnaires, trapped by an eternal curse.
That don't make a lick of sense. If the Cabal turned immortal just by getting their butts kicked, they'd be as old as me by now.
Cabal legends also tell of the Headless Ones. Their tales say the monsters are cursed by the shame of defeat.
You gotta hand it to the Cabal. They got one-track minds. Everything comes back to honor, victory, and the size of their tusks.
"Would you like some tea?" The trip to Luna had been a short one, but now Ido sat uncomfortably in a folding chair in Eris Morn's dwelling. Her host poured steaming liquid from a vessel into a small ceramic cup. The scribe took it politely, trying to keep the contents from spilling over the rim. "So you believe the Headless Ones are connected to this Hall Between?" Eris said. "Yes," Ido answered. "I do not believe they are of Hive origin." "I see. Oh, you do? I was wondering..." Ido trailed off under Eris's stare. The scribe looked down at her tea. Humans tended to drink such things communally, but Eris had not poured a cup for herself. Letting her eyes wander, Ido realized the room was oddly bare, but for the teapot and a laddered mat at the door's threshold. The lettering on it was illegible. There was a long silence. "I was asked to make this place more hospitable," Eris said. Ido wasn't sure if this was an explanation or an apology. During that time, children would run amok, Cryptarch Matsuo explained. They would extort foodstuffs from the citizenry under the threat of vandalism, hence the participants' eagerness to disguise their identities, Ido mused. "But how does this spirit of lawlessness relate to communion with the dead?" She continued, puzzled. Matsuo shrugged. Maybe the Hall-Between was a celebration of transgression in general, a period when people disguised themselves to act out of character. When docile hatchlings acted as bandits, Ido supplied, and the dead returned to speak with the living. Exactly, the Cryptarch nodded, and those without heads were granted replacements for a time. I believe you're due for congratulations, Ido continued, and several apologies. Your work revealing the Headless Ones was a feat of rare scholarship. Well, thank you for saying so, Glint chirped. He seemed to double in size as his shell swelled with pride. When I started my investigation, everyone laughed at me. But who's laughing now? I'm not sure, Ido admitted. Is it Drifter? He sometimes snickers at my expense. No, Glint explained patiently. It's me. I'm the one who's laughing. Oh, Ido exclaimed. You're laughing as an expression of vindication. I understand. Yup, I'm the only paranormal expert in the tower who's also a ghost, Glint preened. Fascinating, Ido agreed. However, I do have a few questions about your conclusions. The findings of Ido, scribe of House Light, regarding the beings known as the Headless Ones, continued. From which I conclude that the pumpkin was some type of sentient gourd that contained eyes and a mouth, sometimes a single eye, and sometimes the less unsettling 4 eyes. Whether these gourds were killed, cooked, and eaten is a point of debate. Perhaps after a time they were angered at being hunted for food and eventually turned on their predators. But then, if I am reading this pre-Golden Age primary source correctly, certain religious festivals were devoted to rearing the heaviest pumpkin. Perhaps these pumpkins were instead used as guides to traverse the Hall-Between, though I still do not understand how a gourd could attain locomotion. After seeing Glint's evidence, I combed our archives for any mentions of headless bodies, Cryptarch Matsuo began, and I uncovered what I consider to be the oldest known documentation of the Headless Ones. He slid a vacuum-sealed piece of parchment across the desktop to Ido, who chittered in anticipation. As you can see, Matsuo continued with a self-satisfied smirk, this report was written by a Golden Age scholar who describes himself a 4th grade researcher. He calls this document a book report, Ido noticed. There must have been a larger body of inquiry to the subject than we ever imagined. Absolutely, Matsuo affirmed, and this report identifies the individual who I believe discovered the very first Headless One. A scientist named Ichabod Crane, Ido exclaimed with delight. So, if the Headless Ones were created by Nokris as you claim, Ido continued, how could they come to populate a cavern on Earth? Maybe some Headless Ones hitched a ride from the moon, Glint posited, like stowaways of cosmic evil. Perhaps, Ido replied, unconvinced, or perhaps they are not of Hive origin after all. We may not have enough data yet to draw any conclusions. But one thing we can clarify right now, she continued, is why the Headless Ones are so poorly named. Obviously, they have heads. Glint's digital iris narrowed. He vibrated in a low whir, which Ido misinterpreted as thoughtful consideration. The findings of Ido, scribe of House Light, regarding the beings known as Headless Ones, continued. Here's what we know about the strange pre-Golden Age ritual of the Hall-Between. Common humans wore monstrous masks for cosmetic and spiritual purposes, a custom that survives via Festival of the Lost. Masked humans were allowed, if not encouraged, to participate in banditry and extortion of their neighbors. This seemed especially prevalent among juveniles. Humans used a long-extinct variety of pumpkin familiars to breach the veil between life and death. It's unclear what role these sentient fruits played in the ritual, but the psycho-spiritual power of the legendary gourds merits further research. If pre-Golden Age humans knew of the Headless Ones, Ido said, then they cannot be of Hive origin. A reasonable deduction, Cryptarch Matsuo affirmed. Humanity's first contact with the Hive didn't occur until sometime during the collapse. Glint will be disappointed by this conclusion, Ido said reluctantly. I suspect so, Matsuo replied. Speaking of Glint, if you could omit my contribution to your research, I would appreciate it. He tapped his forefingers together carefully. I was rather dismissive of Glint's early expeditions, and I have no desire to eat crow now. None of us desired that. Ido chittered aghast. I suspect he would taste bitter. You really think that humans created the headless ones? Glint tilted his shell flaps obstinately. Yes, I hypothesize that these were created as part of an ancient human ritual, Ido replied, oblivious to the ghost's indignation, called the Hall Between. Glint tilted incredulously. A hall between what? The realms of the living and dead, Ido reasoned, to which the ancient pumpkins were key. Glint's shell flaps were slack in confusion. So, while I appreciate your discovery of the headless ones, Ido continued, I cannot support your conclusions regarding their origins, or their clearly inaccurate names, Ido added. But I like, Glint sputtered. I must reiterate that they do, in fact, have heads, Ido insisted in exasperation. It's their defining feature. The findings of Ido, scribe of House Light, regarding the beings known as headless ones, continued. It seems the overarching theme of the Hall Between was transgression. It was a time when social strictures were lifted and humans were permitted to cross the boundaries of nature and society. It appears that most humans use this license to contact their ancestors, similar to the Vanguard severance rituals aboard the Leviathan. However, it is entirely possible that more adventurous practitioners use the power of the pumpkins to create entirely new beings, the headless ones. I'm grateful for Glint for conclusively proving the existence of these reclusive creatures. However, my subsequent research with the Guardian leads me to challenge his conclusions regarding their origins. This debate is likely to continue as long as Lightbearers retain their ghoulish taste for the Headless One's loot and their visceral candy innards. Tales of the Forgotten Volume 3. It's the new lore book for this year's festival event, and it has some pretty great lore. But today we're going to read all 33 lore cards from this new book. Enjoy. The Tower Bazaar is beginning to wake with activity as Ido sighed and placed her datapad on the table in front of Crow's ghost. Glint, this research on the Hall Between has me thinking about stories. The ones that evoke fear. The scary ones, as you've said. Like the ones about the drowned captain? Glint asked. Exactly, she said. My father told me not so long ago that the odes are for hatchlings, but throughout our research on the Hall Between and the Headless Ones, I've discovered that people of all ages and all backgrounds enjoy these tales of dread, regardless of the academic merit or accuracy. So I'd like to make something similar for people to enjoy. I want to try writing my own. That's a wonderful idea. What will you write first? Well, I'm not exactly sure. I need some inspiration. Oh, I'd love to help. Now, first thing to know about scary stories is that sometimes nothing is as scary as the truth. The room Eris had stuck Amaru in was minuscule. There were no windows to watch the hours and days pass by, no electronics to hack, just containers of decommissioned armor stacked against the far wall, and one small, empty crate in the middle of the room, adorned with a handwritten sign that simply said, "You," and an arrow pointing menacingly downward. It was placed there as a warning after he was caught lurking around the more sensitive areas of the tower. Ikora had confiscated his shaded shell disguise and placed a hidden agent somewhere outside to report on his every move. She did, however, leave some blank crossword pages for him. Amaru stared at the crate, emitting a low-pitched growl as a lone sweeper bot entered, surprising the ghost. He circled, then scanned his random and unexpected visitor. It was standard issue, nothing special. Amaru was disappointed. I still can't believe Savathun would do this to me, Amaru said to the bot as he flew directly into its face. The nerve of it all, leaving me here as collateral, and then to ask for information? He watched the bot shuffle away and broom the open crate. Then again, who says I have to share everything? Amaru swooped around, quickly hacking into the sweeper bot's systems. Grab an empty kit bag from over there. Should be just the right size if I remove a little weight. As the bot complied, Amaru chuckled, shedding his standard hive shell. Right, time for a jailbreak. After a few arduous attempts and one superbly acted sob story told to an incredibly gullible ghost, Amaru eventually sauntered off in a new constricting shell. In his latest disguise, he sulked through the halls and hangars and workshops, scanning everything and anything he could find on his way to the courtyard. There, he hovered among the gnarled branches of a giant tree, nearly invisible among the colorful lanterns adorning it. He watched guardians meditate among candles, the flames flickering in the breeze. Others, dressed as insects and arachnids, gleefully danced or bobbed for apples, their revelry flanked by a pair of guardians galloping by with coconut shells. Amid the flurry of costumes and masks, his gaze finally settled on people sharing small wrapped objects. Amaru gingerly floated closer to the base of the tree to get a better look. "Hey, move along, pal. I saw that candy first," a voice sneered from behind him. "I called dibs on that candy. Don't make me say it again." Amaru turned to see another ghost as she made a beeline for the candy on the ground beneath him. "You, what are you wearing? You dipped your shell in human food?" Amaru spat. The other ghost sighed. "It's a caramel apple shell, you dolt. If you knew anything, you'd recognize how special it is." "Looks sickly." "It's a delicacy. Note the elegant ornamentation of crushed toffee bits," she said and spun around. "If you haven't lost your self-respect yet, allow me to lose it on your behalf," he shot back. Her iris narrowed as she fixated on Amaru's shell. "Pfft, I'm surprised your guardian didn't dress you up like a lemon," she scoffed. "I ain't got no guardian," Amaru sniffed. The other ghost bobbed toward him. "Wait, you're unpartnered too? I knew there were more of us out. Happy Festival of the Lost, friends." "Oh no." Amaru and the other ghost groaned in unison as they faced a cheerful glint. The toffee-covered ghost transmatted away the second she heard Glint's voice. Unfazed, Glint approached the snake-covered ghost, determined to meet a new friend. "Hello, stranger. Are you enjoying the festival?" Glint asked. "Get lost," Amaru snarled, and Glint jumped back in surprise. "Amaru? You… Be quiet, will ya? I'm, trying to enjoy the festival incognito," Amaru whispered. Glint quietly stared back for a moment. "You broke out of Eris's crate, huh?" he said. "I was in a room, not a crate," Amaru replied tersely. "I wasn't waiting to be let out again on good behavior. I'm my own ghost." "Then you should join me and Ido." "No." "But we're collecting inspiration for scary stories, starting with our research on the Headless Ones and the Hall Between." "Headless what?" "Headless Ones," Glint chirped. "Giant pumpkin-headed enemies that the Guardians have been fighting. They're mysterious monsters filled with candy." "Fighting the Guardians? In that case, I'd love to hear what your little fallen friend has to say about them." Ido sat in the tower's bazaar beneath the afternoon sun, comfortably situated at a table with a full pot of tea. She gazed intently into her cup, her research and data pad spread out around her. "Ido, Amaru is going to…" "Ido? Why are you staring at your tea instead of writing?" Glint peered at her in confusion, Amaru in tow. "I was going to write, but then I discovered the art of tasseomancy while following an old research lead," she said, her eyes never leaving her cup. "Apparently, it's a method of discerning things yet to come by assessing patterns within the leaves and sediment. I thought it might help." "I was looking for monsters, not tea," Amaru growled. Glint peeked over Ido's shoulder, watching the leaves move in her drink. Ido squinted her 4 eyes. "This pattern looks like Commander Zavala knitting with Empress Keitel," Glint exclaimed. Ido watched as the leaves swirled around in the tea in the shape of a ragged claw, and a sharp chill suddenly settled deep within her. "No, it's Finch with a lucent night. No, a hunter. No, wait, he's hugging Savathun," Glint called out again. "Why did I think for a second this was going to be worth my while?" Amaru muttered and left. "Forget the tea," Glint said. I've got something better. He transmatted a set of objects onto the table, and Ido gasped, her heartbeat quickening. The deck of whispers? You stole Eris's cards? Borrowed, he corrected, twirling around the table to face her. Glint, what? I left a note. Ido shivered as she conjured the image of a hive-altered Eris in her mind. It's too dangerous. She quickly pushed the cards away, but Glint nudged them back. I heard that Eris consulted the deck to gain information to make decisions. I thought we could use it to inspire your writing. Let's just try, Glint begged. How hard can it be? Ido sighed and picked up the cards, shuffling them with her 4 hands in the flamboyant style the drifter taught her. How many cards, she asked. Try 3, Glint said. And when I watched Eris, she had to ask the cards a question. Ido thought for a moment. What kind of danger would be threatening enough for a scary story? Ido cut the deck in half, and she felt a surge of energy as she selected the first card, the Harbinger. Wait, I've got a better one. What kind of dangerous situation could be happening right now? Glint exclaimed. Glint, I don't think we should. We need to write based on a true story, right? This is exactly how we do it. Ido closed her eyes, feeling the energy surge again in her hands, and continued. The lie, 3 of worms. She opened her eyes and studied the cards. Eris can be, well, intimidating, she admitted, pointing to the Harbinger card. No, the cards aren't literal, it's a metaphor, Glint said. The Harbinger and the lie. That means the spirits of the dead are lost like leaves on the wind and wandering the earth, Glint gasped. But the lie is upside down. That wouldn't make sense. It's right side up to me, because you're on the opposite side of the table. It's my reading, remember? Oh yeah, he quickly changed position. Then they are lost. They have purpose. They seek revenge against the living by changing us into headless ones with paracausal worm power. Ido pondered the cards. Actually, I was thinking that solitude and being isolated can evoke terror in both humans and Elixni. Perhaps my scary story should include that. Glint shrugged in his shell. Not bad. I still like mine better. Maybe try it again. Ido nodded and swept up the cards to shuffle once more. The colors of dusk were already painted in the sky beyond the last city by the time Glint approached Crow, stationed on the outskirts of the tower. Crow, you'll never believe what happened today. Ido and I were talking. I mean, we talk a lot, but today about the headless ones, and then she got the idea to write a scary story. And then Ido was going to write, but then she didn't. I mean, she did, but first tea. It didn't help. So then I borrowed Eris's deck of whispers. The cards are incredible. No wonder Eris... Glint stopped and saw Crow's gaze following a squadron's contrails in the far-off distance. The ghost floated up and nudged Crow's cheek. The hunter jumped in startled surprise. Glint, I didn't see you there. Did you say something? Crow asked. Just that I'm here if you want to talk. Glint leaned against the guardian's shoulder, and Crow reached up to touch the little ghost shell. Amaru materialized again in the corner of the courtyard, not far from the bust of Cade 6. He continued his studies, watching guardians obediently crowd around a human with more candy. Lots of candy, in fact. Her laughter pealed like mesmerizing bells as she bestowed her confections, the guardian seeming to respond to her every command. Subjugation by sucrose, Amaru thought to himself. Much less messy than the highway. What I wouldn't give to try it out myself. He chuckled out loud at the thought. An oblivious titan stopped directly in front of him, adjusting his giant chicken mask with one hand while cradling a mound of confections with the other. A chicken charged the titan. He gasped and quickly dropped his bounty of candy in front of the ironwood tree, hands outstretched in a semblance of surrender. The chicken feverishly flapped her wings and mercilessly pecked his fingers. Colonel, it's me! It's me! The titan cried out in agony, trying to yank his mask loose. I'm not a chicken! Mask wedged askew, the Titan ran and frantically barreled straight through Amaru. The ghost slammed into Colonel with a solid thud. The chicken focused her rage on Amaru and snapped at his yell. She found purchase on the silver snake decoration and clamped down. "Let go," Amaru yelled, wishing he had his hive shell to swat the bird away. He sped through the courtyard tower toward the hangar, but Colonel had the strength of a Titan, the finesse of a hunter, the cunning of a warlock, and held on the whole way. Anna Bray passed through the courtyard, her mechanical dog at her heels. "Happy Festival of the Lost, Eva." "Oh dear Anna," Eva called back and held out a small package. "I thought Archie deserved to celebrate the festival in style with his own costume this year." Anna gasped softly with delight as she unfurled a tiny cloak. "Look at you, Archie. I always knew you were a hunter at heart." She bent to secure the cloak just as a ghost came zipping in the direction of the hangar, a rage-filled chicken hanging off his shell. Archie's cloak flapped over the ghost's eye. Unable to see, the ghost skipped and skidded along the floor of the courtyard, landing in the abandoned pile of candy beneath the ironwood tree. Colonel's beak shook loose on impact. She expertly bobbed and weaved around the candy, her pecking focused on the ghost's eye. Mechanical barks sounded, and among the candy wrappers, Amaru saw a flurry of feathers fly past. Eventually, the squawking faded into the distance. Amaru sat motionless until he felt the dog's nose nuzzle softly against him. Only then did the flustered ghost emerge from hiding. "Aw, look at that! Archie saved that little ghost from Colonel's wrath. What a good little hunter," a guardian cooed. Amaru watched in awe as every guardian in the courtyard simultaneously forgot about the candy, their attention devoted exclusively to the dog. "Incredible," he mused with fascination. Amaru eventually found Archie again, sleeping and curled in a blanket in the annex. The ghost approximated the guttural sound of cleaning one's throat, and the dog opened one eye. "You know, after the whole chicken thing, I saw what you did there. To those guardians in the courtyard. The way you had them wrapped around your little, paws. You've got a gift," Amaru said, "and I can really use your help." Archie tilted his head, listening. "Right now, those guardians don't care about anything else besides candy. It's controlling them, and they'll do anything for it, so we gotta get control of it instead." Archie growled. "Not to hurt the guardians," Amaru said, feigned sincerity dripping in his voice. "Just to help them. You wanna help Anna, don't you? Keep her safe?" Archie processed for a moment and then barked in agreement, sealing their pact. How nervous, how terrified had I been when they told me he was here, fragmented remains, nothing more. Even still, I nearly thought the knowledge, telling no one, nowhere, would drive me completely mad. But I could be trusted, they said. I could handle it, they said. So too I said, and observed in silence, emplaced. For many nights I kept my watch, my distance. He would not see me, sense me, know me. I was determined, but then again, so was he. Thump, the thump, the thump. I heard it then, the steady, softly beating, an unwavering drum calling out, bidding me to follow. The pests, the wind, I told myself, cocooned in lackless supposition. I wished to be gone from here. But they trusted me, they said. I could handle it, I said. So too were they convinced and left me to my watch. The sound returned for me, over and over and over, until it lost all patience and began to swell. Loud and round it filled my head, roaring and resounding, the pulsing of a heart. I must see him, sense him, know him. How this thought entered my mind I cannot say, but there it stayed eternally. The thump, the thump, the thump. I placed my hand along his casque. The thump, the thump, the thump. I held him there, inside my hands, and screamed into the thick, deep dark. An excerpt from The Forlorn Heart. It wasn't hard for Amaru to find candy to steal, and it was even easier for Archie to find marks willing to hand it over, for him to transmat it into his stomach cavity. The complicated part, they quickly discovered, was what to do with it after. Amaru's room was too conspicuous, too close to his minder. Instead, he searched for hidden niches throughout the tower. But the longer it took to find the next one, the longer Archie remained filled with candy. The extra weight slowed him significantly, and the effort to keep the candy from melting resulted in higher function latency. "We gotta think smarter, not harder," Amaru finally admitted to Archie. "We need to broaden this operation." Archie responded by rolling on the floor, his belly in the air, the candy wrappers crinkling inside him. "I was a scholar once, of vast renown among those beyond the influence of the great machine. Here, I told my house, 'See the truth and speak it to me.' They refused, and so I left, unable to consume the bile of their belief. The wind was bitter, no hollowhod to warm me. The terrain full of danger, no scatterscape to shield me. I was alone, wasting beneath a blanket of snow. But then, in deepened slumber, they came to me. Larger than life, a shadow of stars that rose up around me and whispered my name in a crescendo that threatened to boil my brain. A roar of imperious inquiry surged in my veins, and when it finally subsided, only one question remained. What did I want? Knowledge, percipience, enlightenment. How simple, quaint, and predictable. The words rang in my ears like a gong. Then we will remake you to guide your path toward all knowledge, and you will be bound to 1,000 deaths. On that last breath, you will submit, claimed forever, made and unmade among the specter of the stars until the end of time. I did not have to think, did not have to see or speak. All I needed was to know." An excerpt from the Tragical Scribe. The bar of the ether tank was packed with the city's patrons, Elixni or otherwise. The forlorn drinkers, the karaoke enthusiasts, the social gamblers. Spider casually listened to the fervor as he scrolled through the figures on his datapad, calculating his fortunes. Neon light reflected along the silver snake design of a constricting shell disguise that Amaru wore. Archie trotted beside him as he approached. "I have a proposition for you," Amaru said, but Spider simply continued to read. "If I have to repeat myself, I'll do it and you'll be in my collection," Spider replied and turned suddenly to face him, an empty ghost shell held tight in his claws. "You have no idea who you're messing with," Amaru sneered. Spider bent down to look directly at the ghost, eyes to eye. "Oh, I absolutely do. Now get out." "Candy is the driving currency around here right now, for everything," Amaru said quickly. "I got the means to extract it, adjust the economics for the city, if you will. But I need someone with access to storage, lots of it." Spider paused for a moment. "What's the cut?" 15%. I also need tech for Archie here to quickly transmat the goods over long distances to a big facility," Amaru promised sweetly. 50%, Spider responded. 50% for storage? The tech, the storage, and everything that goes with it. You're out of your mind. 15. 60%, take it or leave it. Amaru narrowed his iris. 50. 60, Spider said again, and then turned to Archie. "And what about you? You agree with this?" Archie barked excitedly, and Spider steepled his fingers. "Looks like we have a deal." "It's the cutest cloak, Elsie. You have to see it." Anna gushed over her earpiece as she tinkered in her workshop. Her computer suddenly flashed a notification, and she frowned. "You could dress that dog in a paper bag and he'd still be inconceivably adorable," Elsie said. The line was silent. "Anna, are you still there?" Elsie asked. Anna responded, focused on her computer screen. Elsie laughed. "I'll call back later." "No, wait," Anna exclaimed, her brow knitted with worry. "Sorry, something's wrong with Archie." "Is he hurt?" Elsie asked anxiously. "No, but I just got a diagnostics report from him. The second one today. I thought the first one was a fluke." She sighed. "He must have a bad subroutine running. I'm just going to have to do a full workup on him." What do the reports say? Lots of stuff, but the one constant is the chemical equations, formulas, and compounds. Carbon 12, hydrogen 22, oxygen 11, carbon 6, hydrogen 8, oxygen 7. Ratios of crystalline carbohydrates, amorphous ones, carrageenan, invertase, theobromine. Individually, these make no sense, but synthesized in certain sequences, it's candy? Amaru was analyzing their take for the day when Spider called. "You think I'm stupid?" Spider grumbled. "I don't know what you're talking about," Amaru said coolly. "The numbers don't add up. The load assessed from your canine is not what my lackeys are calculating in the warehouse. I ain't skimming from you. Maybe check your lackeys. These numbers keep coming in skewed and the deal's off, understand? Then you can kiss your 40% goodbye. Oh, and another thing. I keep seeing Guardians going to the tower for their candy. Fix it," Spider demanded and hung up. Maybe this isn't enough," Amaru said to Archie. The dog looked at him quizzically. "We're going to have to go bigger and headless." "Hey," Amaru called out. The walls inside the derelict creaked and groaned in response, shuddering as if the cobbled walls would suddenly rip apart. He was alone. Amaru wandered through the ship until he stumbled on shelves of containment glass that lined the walls. A jar held eyeballs that roiled slowly in viscous liquid, their stare following Amaru. There were hundreds of odd samples and organisms. Some could still be alive, but he wasn't willing to find out. Up ahead, he heard an impossibly low utterance. The infrasonic vibrations melded into a droning moan and swelled into something indescribable. The sound traveled toward him, closer and closer. And then, it stopped. Everything stopped. Amaru turned, face to face with the blood-red eye of another ghost. "Get back!" Amaru shrieked. The red-eyed ghost complied. Its eye seemed to bug outward from the grotesque and malformed patchwork shell that twisted and hunched to one side. The ghost hung lopsided in the air, as if it was dragging the weight of the world. Is Drifter here?" The ghost's iris rapidly flickered from red to blue in a hypnotic pattern. "Guess I'll take that as a no. You, got a name there, pal?" The other ghost's eye immediately went solid red, its gaze still steady on Amaru. "Right. Drifter. Drifter has some goods on the headless ones. Mind if I borrow them? Anything you got." The other ghost floated over to a container marked Cabal Brains and stroked the lid lovingly with its shell. "No," Amaru yelped. "No, I don't need those brains. No, don't need those either. No, you can keep the eyes too." The silent ghost bobbed around Amaru and slid its flap down his shell. It pulled him close until it grazed Amaru's iris. "You're busy. I'll come back never," Amaru whispered as he hurriedly released himself and transmatted away. Back in the last city, Amaru and Archie reviewed their data of the headless ones from a computer terminal. "I think this is everything. Drifter was a no-go," Amaru said. Archie whined in response. "I don't want to talk about it. He didn't have anything we could use. Look, we got ourselves Glint and Ido's research. And the goods I snagged from the Guardians while in the field, there's plenty here to work from." Archie gave him a doubtful look. Amaru donned his hive shell and sighed. "You'll see. Now go find me some supplies. We got work to do." "What do you think?" Ido asked hopefully as Mithrax placed her datapad on the table in front of him. "They are good," he finally admitted. "Really?" she exclaimed. He nodded. "Especially the tragical scribe. To sacrifice one's freedom for boundless knowledge. It is a sorrowful yet troubling tale. I believe everyone will enjoy these stories, including the hatchlings. But Ido, I must caution you. The descriptions can be long sometimes, I know, but I think I can..." "No, you misunderstand. My apprehension is for you. You are a keeper of history and a seeker of truth. By publishing these stories, you conflate your name, Your honor trust as a scribe with untruths. Ido frowned and considered for a moment. Why can't I do both? Mithrak sighed. Because history may not be able to tell the difference. Nightfall was never quite as dark when the last city celebrated the Festival of the Lost. Lanterns cast a pastel mosaic over the people. Glowing candles illuminated their offerings for the dead. A lone hunter wandered among the memorials and stopped to look at each one. Sometimes flowers, sometimes food, sometimes well-loved trinkets or handwritten notes of remembrance and love, photos, children's drawings. He watched an Elixni mother place a delicate scrap of egg cloth, then suddenly knelt beside her. He felt the wax of the lavender-hued candle already in his hand, the wick clean and bright. He moved to light it, to place it among the offerings, and then he stopped. The hunter's expression was gentle and warm as he placed the candle out to the Elixni mother. For your little one, he simply said. She hesitated, then thanked him in her language. He abruptly left and continued on throughout the tower, wandering past the bazaar into the courtyard, until finally he looked up and realized he was standing in the one place he hated to be. The memorials left at Amanda's workshop were many, too many for Zavala to count. He moved them aside, assessing the damage left by Colonel's rampage to the tower from earlier that day. So many feathers, he mused. He pulled back a canvas covering Amanda's belongings to clean up the broken candles scattered beneath. A container of nuts and bolts fell from a workbench. Zavala gasped as they rained down, and he rushed to collect them before they could roll away. He opted to place them in a drawer for safekeeping, and as he did, his fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper. He opened it. A colorful drawing, not of ships, not of adventure, but a large blue titan and a smiling little girl. Tears welled in his eyes, and he held the drawing close. "Can't sleep?" a quiet voice asked. Zavala looked up to find Crow standing in front of him. "I suppose I could ask the same of you," Zavala replied instead. "Want some company?" Zavala nodded and gently pocketed the drawing. He looked around the uncovered workspace, at the half-full mug of coffee, the single welder's glove, the datapads and blueprints, shop rags and tools. "I always knew I'd have to face this task eventually. Tonight feels, well, right," Zavala said. He lovingly picked up a spanner. "I need to find a good home for her tools, someone who will really appreciate them." Crow gave him a slight smile. "I think I might know someone." In the depths of the tower, Amaru cobbled together a prototype torso for his monster with patchwork remnants of deceased headless ones, fragments of pumpkins stolen while tagging along with the Guardian. Missing sections were filled in, the left arm of a deceased ogre, the right ripped from a freshly made thrall. Amaru worked well into the night, wiring and welding and seaming and cutting. Finally, it was ready. Amaru sent a current flowing through the wires and ran siphoned ether into his creation. The chest began to swell and heave as if it were breathing. The eyes glowed bright blue and ether poured from its ragged mouth. The monster torso pulled itself upright and dragged itself. A trail of seeds and fibrous orange flesh left behind along the table. The headless one set its gaze upon its maker, and then it grabbed him. The monster's ogre arm gripped Amaru's shell with all of its strength and pulled him toward its mouth as ether vapor rolled over the ghost's eye. Without warning, the head cracked at the seams. It split apart, splattering across the floor. The torso slumped lifeless against the table. When Ido found Ikora, she was meditating beneath a jacaranda tree, away from the noise of the bazaar. "Is there something you need?" Ikora asked, amusement apparent in her voice, her eyes still closed. "I'm sorry to disturb you," Ido said. "Not at all," Ikora replied. She patted the ground beside her. "Clint tells me you have aspirations of becoming an author of scary stories." How are you doing?" It was well at first. I had so many ideas. But now, I think I'm blocked, as Glint put it. I thought that writing could help me handle my fears. I've been very scared of a lot of things lately. Ikora looked at her knowingly. "Eris," she simply said. Ido nodded. "But my writing is not improving in spite of my fear. It is suffering from it. When we use the Deck of Whispers," Ikora quirked an eyebrow, and Ido raised one of her hands. I know, Glint said he left a note. The cards made me realize that there are so many different sources of fear in the universe. A multitude of threats, of unknowns. Perhaps that has become my greatest source of dread. It's important to be honest with yourself and what you're feeling, Ikora replied kindly. You are not alone in these thoughts, these fears, but don't let the cards distract you. They are not meant to tell your fortune or future. They are meant as a guide, a form of insight into yourself. You are the one who ascertains a course of action, not the cards. Amaru and Archie nervously stared at their second assembled prototype on the table. The tech knitted through these salvaged organic components had been upgraded. The Cabal sword replaced its right hand. Splicer wiring wove through its left arm. Vex milk coursed through its veins. The rest had been completely pieced together from carefully procured Headless One parts, reassembled into a patchwork of organic horror. It oozed a dark, gelatinous liquid from its seams and smelled of death. Next to the body was the final piece, a perfectly intact pumpkin head. Archie sniffed and pawed at the dormant head, and the pumpkin rocked from side to side. Careful, Amaru snapped. Those things don't sever easily without exploding, he shuddered. One favor to Drifter is enough. Amaru attached the head to the body, a perfect, mutilated fit. He opened the chest cavity, the flesh stretching and tearing as he inserted a discolored hive crystal inside. Energy surged through the headless monster, and a haunting red light flickered inside its head. It howled and snarled as it sat up. Aha! It's perfect! Perfect! Amaru mused with glee. You want candy, huh? You crave it. Need it, Amaru said to the monster. It ambled forward and swiped its good arm at him in response. Then go out there and get it. All of it, Amaru said. The monster found its footing and began to hurry toward the door. Archie growled and raced after it as Amaru giggled with delight. Now the real fun begins. The Headless One quickly made its way to the bazaar. Vendors scattered, people grabbed hatchlings and children, running in every which direction. Glint and Ido watched in horror as the Headless One lashed out and shoved a rotisserie over, quickly catching nearby booths on fire. It ripped apart a display of candy, devouring every last piece in sight, and when it was gone, the monster continued its rampage. It tore through lanterns, pulling them apart as if searching for something. It smashed fruit from one booth, threw vegetables from another. Frustrated, it began to claw at the drawings of candy on the ground. A fistful of decoration in its good hand as it shrieked with a blood-curdling scream. A Headless One? Ido and Glint exclaimed in unison as Archie raced up beside them. We need help. I'll go find Crow, Glint said. There's no time. The longer we wait, the more dangerous this monster becomes, and someone could be killed. We have to stop it now, Ido replied. She hastily analyzed the composition of the monster. It's not like the Headless Ones we've studied before. Look at its appendages. Is that Vex milk? I think so, Glint said. Saccharomyces cerevisiae and sucrose react with Vex milk. If my calculations are correct, the chemical reaction creates a mass in what humans categorize as a toothpaste. If the excreted gas gets caught, the point, Glint. The Headless One would break apart without putting anyone in danger, he quickly shouted. It would have to ingest the catalyst, Ido surmised. Exactly, but it's not like we have to force-feed it bread, it eats candy. Archie barked repeatedly beside them. I don't speak dog, Glint said, and Ido shrugged. Archie growled and then transmatted a pile of candy onto the ground. Ido and Glint exchange a look of surprise. "That'll work," she said. Ido raced to a nearby vendor table of Elixni baked goods and swiped the biggest loaf she could find. Her 4 hands worked furiously, tearing off chunks of bread and wrapping them in candy wrappers, and she suddenly realized she was very glad to be Elixni. "Ido!" Glint yelled. She looked up and saw the Headless One barreling toward them and the assorted pile of candy at her feet. They scrambled out of the way just as the Headless One descended on the colorful wrappers. It devoured everything without a second glance, but nothing happened. "I don't understand," Glint said. "That should have worked." "Perhaps there's a chamber inside, something to hold the Vex milk as it distributes around the body?" Ido asked. "We're going to find out," Glint said. He zipped toward the Headless One, scanning it as it swiped furiously at him. "The chest," he called out just as the monster batted him away. Glint spun through the air, dizzy but unharmed. Archie barked and immediately rushed to action, enticing the Headless One to chase him. The dog led it toward the kettle corn stand, weaving quickly through its legs. The monster stumbled, and Archie leapt forward, giving it a solid shove. The monster caught the massive cast iron kettle, pulling it down as it fell to the ground. The kettle landed on its chest, and with a solid crunch, pouring popcorn and hot liquid sugar into the Headless One's body. The monster howled in pain and pried itself free. It swayed as it stood, Vex milk bubbling from its chest wound. Crow, Zavala, and Anna rushed forward with Glint beside them, and Ido pushed them away. "Get back!" she yelled and took cover. The Headless One screamed again, its body expanding, the edges of the pumpkin head splitting and cracking. Suddenly, the monster exploded, erupting in a rainbow of foam that rose thick and high into the sky before cascading into a sticky sea coating the entire bazaar. The remains of the festival stands laid in a heap, everything and everyone covered in a layer of rancid, foamy pumpkin ooze. Imaru drifted by, almost dancing through the air as he surveyed the destruction. "Did you see that? It was like a giant foamy screeb," he laughed. "Better than anything I could have imagined." "You did this?" Crow exclaimed, and Imaru tipped his hive shell toward him in response. "I just set the events in motion. Your little friends there finished the job." "This sticky substance, it's amazing by the way. No notes. Definitely worth the look on your faces right now." He cackled and floated away. "Happy Festival of the Lost, meatbags." "What a mess," Ido said. "The destruction of the bazaar's festival space is disheartening. The substance created in the explosion is, well, much stickier than we calculated. Not to mention the smell," Zavala said, covering his nose. "This is unbearable." Anna swiped a sample of the material from her shoulder. It's disgusting, but still just organic material. When I was performing some diagnostics on Archie the other day, I noticed a cleanup protocol buried in his subroutines, but I couldn't access the code. Maybe we could ask him to try it out here." "What does he do with it? Put everything in a pile? Eat it?" Crow asked. Anna shrugged. "Only one way to find out. Archie, would you be willing to run it?" Archie barked and got to work. Deep in the bowels of one of Spider's warehouses, he gripped the neck of a warehouse worker. "So tell me something. When the rule no stealing was explained to you, which part did you not understand?" The worker struggled against Spider's grip. I didn't steal the candy." "You know what's worse than stealing from me? Lying to me about it," Spider snarled. "I'll have you—" He stopped suddenly, sniffing the air, and immediately dropped the worker as his gag reflex kicked in. "What's that smell?" He looked up, only to see a barrage of brightly colored foam and rancid pumpkin rain down on his head. As Crow and Zavala made their way through the Elixni quarter, they passed a cluster of young Elixni gathered around a mechanical dog. One hatchling ran forward and stopped short in front of Zavala, her forearms full of candy. She looked up at him and chittered with delight. A chuckle escaped Zavala's lips, and he was surprised by his own sudden smile. Crow waved him on, and eventually they found themselves in front of a small but impressive workshop. A sparrow sat suspended on a lift, thrusters moved, and Elixni tinkered beneath. "It's coming along," Crow called out. The teenage mechanic jerked in surprise and hit her head on the sparrow. She muttered an Elixni phrase under her breath. "It's Ellis. Who taught you such curse talk?" Neek chided as she rounded the corner. "You did," Itzelis replied with a grin. Very likely. Come, greet our guests." "Neek and her sister Itzelis. This is Commander Zavala," Crow said. "Itzelis? That's a unique name," Zavala said. Neek slung 2 arms around her younger sister. Standard Elixni would not do for this one. Itzelis pushed her arms away, earning a laugh from Neek. Zavala nodded. "A pleasure to meet you both. We don't want to keep you, but, well, there's something I wanted to deliver personally to you today." He held up a small, unsuspecting toolbox. Neek's eyes went wide and she gasped. Amanda's instructions were to share them with someone who has machinery on the brain and oil in their veins. "We couldn't think of anyone more fitting, Neek, than you," Crow explained. Neek accepted the gift, and Zavala held out an item wrapped in cloth toward Itzelis. "And from what Crow has told me about you, I'm sure Amanda would want you to have this." Itzelis unwrapped the cloth, revealing a well-loved spanner. She tenderly touched the initials engraved on the tool, then hugged it to her chest. "Commander, I would like to know her as you knew her. Will you share her stories? There are servitors' holo recordings. We could together watch," Neek said and motioned for the 2 guardians to come inside. "Would you like some tea?" Zavala looked down into the hopeful gaze of Itzelis and recognized something he had seen in a young human girl so many years ago. "I would be honored to share her with you." The amazing stories you have just experienced are now a part of Elixni record. You may not believe any of them to be true, but if you do, know that you are in good company with those who have lived to tell these tales. The universe is an enigma, wild and mysterious, full of horrors and terrors and temptation. But go where others are tremulous to tread. Step beyond your senses and embrace the unknown. For only then will you discover new truths and new adventures, but only if you dare. Ithax, House of Light.